Welcome back. We are thrilled to have you again. We are live from the Institut Français as we continue our exceptional series of The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, translated by Michael Morpurgo. Yesterday, we closed our reading with the little prince finally understanding his flower's true purpose. Today, we have yet another exceptional lineup. Michael Morpurgo will continue to read The Adventures of the Little Prince with Ruth Wilson. This series is co-produced by Institut Français du Royaume-Uni, Montblanc, and the Saint-Exupéry Foundation for the Youth. Nihal, I leave it to you.
Raphael, thank you very much indeed. Right. We will start with Michael, and hello Ruth as well.
Hello.
Welcome. Great to see you. Great lighting, may I just say. Brilliant. And Michael, great lighting for you as well, even though you seem to be in a cellar somewhere.
Thank you. No, it's in a bedroom in a little cottage, and I'm glad I got a compliment for my lighting as well.
Perfect. I didn't want you to feel, that I was dissing your lighting. Okay, let's start with chapter 9, just to give everybody a sense of what we're going to be doing here. And you, I believe, Ruth, have been given the bulk of the reading today.
I have, yes, unfortunately.
Okay. Good. And as we are part 3, Michael's having a little bit of a rest today, but still having to read. So, Michael, if you don't mind, take it away.
Chapter 9. When the little prince left his planet, he was greatly helped, it seems, by a flock of migrating birds. On this morning of his departure, he arranged everything just as it should be. He raked out both his 2 active volcanoes. These were especially useful for heating his breakfast every morning. He did have another volcano also, which was extinct. But as he said, you never know. So he raked that one out too. If they are kept clean and tidy, volcanoes burn away quite happily and don't erupt. Volcanic eruptions are like chimney fires. Of course, on planet Earth, we are far too small to rake out our volcanoes, which is why they cause so many problems. It was with some sadness that the little prince pulled up the last of his baobab shoots. He thought it likely he would never be back again. So every one of these little daily chores were very important to him that morning. As he was watering his dear little flower for the very last time and was about to lower the cloche over her to shelter her, he found he was near to tears. Goodbye, he said to the flower, but she did not reply, so he said it again. Goodbye. The flower coughed, but it wasn't because she had a cold. I was stupid and mean to you, she told him, and I'm sorry. I want you to be happy. The little prince was amazed at this sudden change in her. He stood there quite bewildered, still holding the cloche over her. He just could not understand this new gentleness and thoughtfulness in her. I do love you, you know, his flower told him. And it's all my fault you didn't understand that. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, not really, because when all's said and done, you were just as silly as I was. We must try to be happy, that's what I say. And you can put that cloche down now, I don't want it anymore. But what about the wind? Oh, my cold sounds worse than it is. It's not so bad. The cool night air will do me good. I am a flower, after all. But what about all those wild creatures out there? Said the little prince. Well, as I see it, if I ever want to see butterflies, I think I have to put up with 1 or 3 caterpillars. Don't you? I hear butterflies are very beautiful. And if the butterflies and caterpillars are not around, who else will come to see me? You are going to be far away on your travels, aren't you? And as for any wild animals, I'm not frightened of them. Not one bit. I have my claws, remember? And to remind me, she showed me her 4 little thorns. Then she said, and what are you hanging around for anyway? It's really annoying me. If you're going, just go. She didn't want the little prince to see her crying. She was such a proud little flower.
Chapter 10. The little prince was soon travelling in amongst the asteroid field.
specifically to asteroid numbers 325, 326, 327, 328, 329, and 330. He wanted to visit each one of them to widen his knowledge and to discover all he could. On the first asteroid, there lived a king, dressed in purple and ermine. He was seated on a throne that was both modest but also majestic at the same time. "Oh, look," cried the king on seeing the little prince. "A subject." The little prince wondered how the king had recognized him when he had never seen him before. He did not realize that kings see the world in a rather simplistic way, that for them, everyone is a subject. "Come close, so that I can see you better," said the king, who was delighted and proud to discover that at last he had found someone to rule over. The little prince looked about him for somewhere he might sit down, but the whole planet was covered by the king's magnificent ermine cloak. So he just had to remain standing, and because he was rather tired, he now yawned. "It's against court etiquette to yawn in the presence of a king," said the monarch. "I absolutely forbid it." I can't help it," replied the little prince, who was rather bewildered. "I have come a very long way and I haven't slept a wink." "Very well then," the king said to him. "Then I order you to yawn. I haven't seen anyone yawning for years now, so the sight of yawning is very interesting for me and rather intriguing. So yawn again. It is my command." "You've made me very nervous. I can't do it now," said the little prince, who was covered in confusion by all this. Well, the king said, "Well, then I order you to yawn sometimes." He was spluttering and was clearly vexed. Of course, the king expected his authority always to be respected. He would not tolerate disobedience of any kind. He was an absolute monarch. But because he was a good sort of man, he only gave orders that were reasonable and sensible. For example, he might say, "If I ordered a general to transform himself into a seabird, and the general did not obey me, then that wouldn't be the general's fault, would it? It would be my fault." "Might I sit down now, please?" the little prince ventured to ask. "I order you to sit down," the king told him, and most graciously, he made available a fold of his ermine cloak for the little prince to sit on. The more he thought about it, the more the little prince was astonished. The planet was tiny. What was there for this king to reign over? "Sire," he began, "I beg to excuse me for asking you a question, but..." The king interrupted him at once. "I command you to ask me a question," he said. "Sire, what exactly do you reign over in this place?" "Everything," replied the king. He said it with such majestic simplicity. "Everything?" With a sweep of his hand, the king made the extent of his kingdom quite obvious. He was not king. He was king not only of his planet, but of all the other planets they could see, and the stars as well. "Over all that?" asked the little prince. "All of it," the king replied. So this was not just an absolute monarch. This was a universal monarch. "And the stars obey you then?" asked the little prince. "Of course they do," said the king. "They obey me instantly. I do not tolerate any indiscipline, I assure you. Such power amazed the little prince. If he had power like that, he could watch the sunset not just 44 times a day, but 72, even 100 or 200 times in the same day, without ever having to move his chair. But then, because he was full of sadness at the sudden thought of his home, of the little planet he had abandoned, he was emboldened to ask a favor of the king. I should love to see a sunset, he said. Do me the great kindness, please, sire, of commanding the sun to set for me. If I were to command a general, the king replied, to fly from one flower to another like a butterfly, or to write a great tragedy, or to change himself into a seabird, and if this general did not obey the order I had given him, who is to blame, the general or me? It would be you, the little prince told him. No question. Precisely. You have to expect from everyone only what it is possible for them to do. All authority is based on reason. If you order your people to go and throw themselves in the sea, there would be a revolution. I have the right to expect them to obey me only if my orders are reasonable. Yes, but what about my sunset? Asked the little prince again. Once he had asked the question, the little prince would never simply forget it. He insisted on an answer. You will have your sunset. I shall command it, said the king. I'm just waiting for the conditions to be right before I give the order. That is part of my science of government. And when will that be? The little prince went on. Well, let me see, the king replied, consulting a huge calendar before he spoke again. Let me see, it will be about 20 minutes to 8. Then you shall see just how well I am always obeyed. The little prince yawned. He was disappointed he was not going to be able to get his sunset after all. And he was becoming somewhat bored too. Well, if there's nothing more for me here, he said, I'm off. Don't go, replied the king, who was so proud and happy to have a subject at last. Don't go, I shall make you minister. Minister of what? Of, let me think, of justice. But there is no one around to judge. We don't know that, the king insisted. I haven't yet travelled the whole length and breadth of my kingdom. I am very old. There's no room for a carriage, and it would be far too exhausting to go on foot. But I've already seen all there is to see of your kingdom, said the little prince, turning to have another good look at the other side of the planet. And there's no one here. Well, in that case, you could judge yourself, said the king. That's very hard indeed. You know, much more difficult than to judge others. It is a wise man who can judge himself. Well, I am quite capable of judging myself wherever I am, said the little prince. I do not have to be here. Well, the king began. Somewhere on my planet, I know there is an old rat. I hear him at night times. Say you judge the old rat. Say you condemn him to death from time to time. So his life depends on your sense of justice. You will have to spare his life, of course. There is only one of them on the planet, you see. The little prince replied, "Actually, I don't approve of the death sentence. And now I really think I should be going." "No," said the king. The little prince, although he had said all he wanted to say and done all he wanted to do on this planet, did not want to upset the old king. "If your majesty likes to be obeyed upon command, at once you could give me a reasonable command. You could, for instance, order me to be gone inside a minute. Conditions look favourable, I think, your majesty." The little prince waited a moment for a reply, but the king didn't seem to have anything more to say. With some sadness, the little prince turned and walked away. As he was leaving, the king called out after him, "I will make you my ambassador," he cried. He was still full of his majestic airs and graces. On his way again, the little prince thought to himself, "These grown-ups are really odd." Chapter 11. On the second planet the little prince travelled to, there lived a man who was extraordinarily conceited. "Aha! A visit from one of my fans," he cried, when he first saw the prince coming. For men such as this, everyone else was an admirer, a fan. "Good morning, sir," said the little prince. "That's some hat you're wearing. Very useful for welcoming my fans, for acknowledging their applause. But unfortunately, no one ever comes here." "Really?" said the little prince, who did not quite understand. "I'll show you. Clap your hands, one against the other," the man went on. The little prince did as he was told and clapped his hands. The man responded by doffing his hat in acknowledgement of this applause. "Well, at least this is more fun than a visit to the king," thought the little prince. So he went on clapping his hands. And of course, the man went on doffing his hat. But after 5 minutes of all this, the little prince did get fed up with a rather monotonous game. "And what would I have to do," the little prince asked him, "to make that hat fall off?" The man was not listening. Such puffed up people only ever listen to praise and flattery. "I want you to tell me just how much you admire me," said the man. "What exactly do you mean by admire?" asked the little prince. "To admire me," replied the man, "means to recognize that I am the most handsome man on the planet, the best dressed, the wealthiest, and the most intelligent. But you are the only man on this planet," the little prince told him. "Admire me all the same," said the man, "just as a favor." The little prince shrugged and said, "All right then, I admire you. But I really don't understand why that should be so important to you." And the little prince walked off. Once on his way again, he kept thinking to himself, "These grown-up folk are really very odd."
Chapter 12. On the next planet the little prince came to on his travels, there lived a man who was a drunk. This visit was over very quickly and left the little prince feeling deeply depressed. He found him sitting in silence, surrounded by piles of bottles, some empty, some full. "What are you doing here?" the little prince asked him. "I'm drinking," the drunk told him gloomily. But why are you drinking? The little prince asked him. To forget. To forget what? The little prince inquired, already feeling very sorry for this sad man. To forget that I am ashamed, confessed the drunk, hanging his head in shame. Ashamed of what? The little prince asked, wanting to help him somehow. I'm ashamed of drinking, the drunk replied, and then lapsed into a deep silence. Perplexed, the little prince went on his way, thinking all the while, my goodness, some of these grown-up folk are really very strange folk indeed.
Chapter 13. The fourth planet on the little prince's travels belonged to a businessman. This man was so wrapped up in his work that he did not so much as look up when the little prince arrived. Good morning, the little prince said. Did you know your cigarette is out? 3 and 2 makes 5. 5 and 7 makes 12. 12 and 3 makes 15. Good morning. 15 and 7 makes 22. 22 and 6, that's 28. No time to light it again. 26 and 5 equals 31. Wow. That makes 501,622,731. 500 million what? The little prince asked. But you still there? 501 million. I forgot. I have so much work on. This is work of the greatest importance. I don't have time for chit-chat. 2 and 5 equals 7. 501 million of what? The little prince repeated, who never in his life gave up once he had asked a question. The businessman looked up. It's been 54 years. I hear that I've lived on this planet, he began, and I've only been disturbed 3 times. The first time was 22 years ago by a Maybug that came from goodness only knows where. He kept making the most dreadful noise, and as a result of which I made 4 mistakes in my calculations. The second time, 11 years ago now, it was an attack of rheumatism that interrupted my work. I don't do enough exercise, that's my trouble, but I don't have time to go messing about. I have work to get on with, work of the greatest importance. And the third time is, now, you. Now, where was I? Oh yes, I was up to 501 million. 501 million what? Asked the little prince. The businessman understood by now that there would be no hope of peace and quiet until he answered the question. Millions of these little things you can sometimes see up in the sky. You mean flies? No, little shiny things, you know. Bees? No, little golden things that make lazy people daydream. But I have work to get on with, work of the greatest importance. I don't have time for daydreaming. Oh, I know, said the little prince. You mean stars. That's it, stars. And what do you do with all these 500 million stars? 501,622,731. My work is of the greatest importance. I have to be precise. And what do you do with all these stars? What do I do with them all? Yes. Nothing. I just own them. You own the stars. Yes. But I've just met with the king of one of these stars who, kings own nothing, they rule, and that's very different. But what good does it do you to own the stars? Makes me rich. But what's the good of being rich? It means I can buy other stars, should anyone discover them. The little prince was thinking, This man is reasoning quite like the drunk on the other planet. And on he went with his questions. How exactly can anyone own stars? So who do you imagine they belong to anyway? The businessman retorted rather grumpily. I don't know, to no one, probably. Exactly. So they belong to me because I was the first to think of it. And that's a good enough reason, is it? Of course it is. If you find a diamond that belongs to no one, then it's yours. If you discover an island that belongs to no one, then it's yours. When you are the first to invent an idea, you patent it, don't you? It's yours. I own the stars for the simple reason that no one before me ever dreamed of owning them. Understand? All right, said the little prince. But if you own them, what can you do with them? I manage them, replied the businessman. I count them and then count them again. It's difficult work, but it is work of the greatest importance. The little prince was still not satisfied. Listen, he said. Say I own a silk scarf. I can wrap it around my neck, can't I? And say I own a flower. I can pick it up and take it with me, can't I? You can't pick up a star and take it with you, can you? No, but I can put it in a bank, replied the businessman. How do you mean? It means that I can write down on a little piece of paper the number of stars I own, and then put that piece of paper away in a drawer and lock it up. That's it. That's all that's needed. The little prince was thinking, that may be quite an amusing idea, even poetic, but it doesn't make much sense. People had rather different ideas from these grown-up folk about what made sense and what did not, about what was important and what was not. I myself happen to own a flower, the little prince went on to tell him, that I water once a day. I own 3 volcanoes that I rake out once a week. I even rake out the one that is extinct because you never know. But I don't just own my volcanoes and my flower. I am useful to them. You may own your stars, but you do nothing for them. The businessman opened his mouth, but could say nothing in reply. The little prince decided that this was a good moment to leave. Once on his travels again, the little prince kept thinking, grown-ups are really quite extraordinary. Chapter 14. The 5th planet was altogether a very curious place. It was the smallest of them all. There was just about room on it for 1 street lamp and 1 lamplighter. The little prince could not work out what purpose they could possibly serve up there in the sky on this tiny planet that was without houses, without anyone there except the lamplighter. All right, so this lamplighter may seem ridiculous, thought the little prince, but is he any less ridiculous than the king, or that conceited fellow, or the businessman, or the drunk? At least there is something meaning to his work. When he lights his lamp, it is as if he is giving birth to a new star or a flower. When he puts his lights out, that sends the flower or the star off to sleep. That seems to be a rather beautiful profession to have. And because it is beautiful, that makes it truly useful. When he came down on the planet, he greeted the lamplighter courteously. Good morning to you, said the little prince. Why are you putting out your lamp? I have my orders, replied the lamplighter. And good morning to you. What are your orders exactly? To put out my lamp. Good evening to you. And he lit his lamp again. So why are you lighting it up again? I have my orders, the lamplighter told him. I don't understand, said the little prince. There's nothing to understand. Orders are orders. That's all there is to it. Good morning to you. And once again, he put out his lamp. Then, dabbing his brow with his red check handkerchief, he said, It's terribly hard work, you know. It was all right before, in the old days. Every morning, I would put out my lamp, and every evening, I'd light it up. I had all the rest of each day to put my feet up, and all night to sleep. So your orders must have changed since then, I suppose, said the little prince. No, not at all, the lamplighter explained. That's the whole problem. The problem is that every year the planet is going round faster and faster, but my orders stay just the same. So, said the little prince, so now the planet is making a complete circuit in 1 minute. And as a result, I don't get a second's rest. Once a minute, I have to light my lamp and put it out. Goodness me, how funny. So a day on this planet of yours lasts only 1 minute. Actually, it's not funny at all, said the lamplighter. You and I, we've already been talking to one another for an entire month. Really? Yes, 30 minutes, 30 days. Good evening to you. And he lit his lamp once again. As the little prince watched him at work, he found himself liking this lamplighter, who was so conscientious about his orders. He remembered how he had to move his chair around to watch the sunsets back at home on his planet. He wanted to help his friends somehow. You know, the little prince began, I think I know a way you could rest up whenever you felt like it. The truth is that I always feel like a rest, said the lamplighter. Of course, it is perfectly possible to be conscientious and lazy at the same time. The little prince explained his idea. Well, your planet is so small that I reckon you could walk all around it in 3 steps. All you have to do is walk quite slowly, and you would always stay in the sunshine, in daytime. So when you want to rest, you just keep walking, and then the day would last as long as you wanted it to. I'm not sure that would help much, said the lamplighter. What I love most in life is to sleep. Then I'm afraid you're out of luck, said the little prince. It would seem so, agreed the lamplighter. Good morning to you. And once more, he put out his lamp. Once more on his journey, the little prince said to himself, my lamplighter friend would be looked down upon by all those others I've met on my travels, by the king, by that conceited fellow, by the drunk, and by the businessman. And yet, the lamplighter is the one who does not seem to me to be ridiculous. That's because he's the only one who thinks about anything else but himself. He sighed. Full of regret, he thought to himself, he's the only one of them I really wanted to have as a friend. But this planet is far too small, and there's certainly not enough room for 2 of us. The little prince did not want to admit it to himself, But he was sorrier still about leaving this planet behind him, because every 24 hours it was blessed with 1,440 sunsets.
Chapter 15. The sixth planet the little prince happened to visit was 10 times the size of the last one. On this planet there lived an old gentleman who wrote great thick books. "Well, I never! An explorer!" exclaimed this old gentleman on seeing the little prince. The little prince sat himself down at the table. He was completely exhausted, for it had been a long journey. "Where do you come from?" the old gentleman said to him. "What is this huge book?" he asked the old gentleman. What is it that you do exactly?" "I'm a geographer," replied the old gentleman. "What is a geographer?" asked the little prince. "A geographer is a scholar who knows where to find all the oceans and rivers and towns and mountains and deserts." "That is so interesting," said the little prince. "At last, someone with a proper profession." He looked around at the geographer's planet. He had never seen a more splendid-looking planet than this. "Your planet," he went on, "is so beautiful. Are there any oceans here?" "Difficult to know," said the geographer. "Oh," said the little prince, who was rather disappointed with this reply. And are there any mountains then?" "Again, it's difficult to know," the geographer said. "And what about towns and rivers and deserts? Have you any of those?" "Well, that's difficult to know as well," said the geographer. But you are a geographer, so surely—" "Very true," the geographer said. "But I am not an explorer. I have no explorers here on my planet at all. It is not for a geographer like me to go out and actually count the towns and rivers and mountains and oceans and deserts. A geographer is far too important to waste time just wandering about the place. He never leaves his study. He may, of course, sometimes be visited by explorers. He may question them and then note down certain accounts of their travels. And if one of these accounts seems to a geographer especially interesting, then the geographer might look into what kind of a man the explorer is his moral code, all that sort of thing." "Why would he do that?" asked the little prince. "Because an explorer who does not tell the truth can cause grave problems for a geographer, problems that could prove catastrophic for his books. And so would an explorer who might prove to be a drunk." "Why is that a problem?" asked the little prince. "Because drunks see double. So the geographer would record 2 mountains in a place when there was really only one." "Then I think I know someone," the little prince said, "who would make a really bad explorer." "Very likely, I'm sure. And when I am sure the explorer is of good character, then an inquiry is carried out into any discovery he claims to have made." "So you go and see for yourself?" "No, that would be too complicated. But it is important to insist that the explorer shows some proof of his discovery. So if he says he has discovered a great mountain, it would be necessary for him to bring back some giant rocks from it as evidence." The geographer became suddenly very animated. "But you have come from far away, haven't you? And you are an explorer? You must tell me all about your planet." And with that, the geographer opened his notebook and sharpened his pencil. "The geographer notes down in his book," he went on, "everything an explorer tells him, but he only writes it in ink once the explorer has provided proper proof of the truth of his story." "Well?" The geographer was waiting expectantly. "Oh dear," said the little prince. "I'm afraid it's not that interesting. My planet is tiny. I have 3 volcanoes, 2 of them active and 1 extinct. But you never know. That's true, agreed the geographer. And I have one flower as well. Oh, we don't record flowers, said the geographer. But why not? Cried the little prince. They are so beautiful. We do not record them because flowers are ephemeral. What does ephemeral mean exactly? You have to understand that books on geography, said the geographer, are the most serious and important of all books. They must never go out of date. Only very rarely does a mountain change where it is. Only very rarely does an ocean dry up. We only write about what lasts, what is eternal. But extinct volcanoes can awaken and become active again, said the little prince, interrupting him. What does ephemeral mean exactly? Whether volcanoes are dormant or active, it's all the same to us, said the geographer. What matters to us is the mountain. A mountain does not change. What does ephemeral mean exactly? The little prince asked yet again. Once he had asked a question, he never in his life gave up until he received a proper answer. It means, replied the geographer, something that is bound sooner or later to disappear. You mean that my flower is bound to disappear? The little prince exclaimed. Well, of course it is. My dear little flower is ephemeral, the little prince said to himself. And she has only 4 thorns to defend herself against the world, and I have left her behind at home all alone. For the little prince, this was a moment of deep regret. But he soon took heart again. What planet do you think I should visit next? He asked the geographer. The planet Earth, replied the geographer. I hear it has a good reputation. And so the little prince left, still thinking of his flower.
Michael, thank you. Ruth, thank you as well. Beautiful.
Have we had birdsong throughout that?
Yeah.
No.
Loved it.
Lovely.
Your blackbird, is it your fault? Is it your blackbird?
It's
Outside
nothing
your
to
window,
me.
Ruth.
It's not my blackbird. He has been around, but he wasn't here today.
It was someone's blackbird or something.
Yeah, it's not me because I've got all my windows closed, but I heard it. I thought it was definitely you. But it's lovely. I thought it was a nice musical accompaniment to go along with both of you doing your accents. I think you particularly liked being the lamplighter.
I did like the lamplighter. I really like him.
Channeled your inner EastEnders potential.
Where that came from, but I thought he's
It will out. It will out.
It was,
Were we interrupted, Ruth, or anyone who's kind of on the technology, by that tractor? Did you hear a tractor go by my window?
no.
Thank goodness for that. That's really good because it went by really loud.
But you know, Michael, the thing about this is, remember, we're all here in our own areas and we can't edit out our lives from this. I'm at home. My 10-year-old daughter just tried to come in. Ruth, what have you got going on in your background?
The sun is kind of wherever it goes, really.
Yes.
I'm just lying down here now.
Can I ask you that, you know, this book in France, as Michael points out in the introduction to it, it's hard to overestimate how important it is in France to generations and, of course, different ages as well. Having read it, can you understand why?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things, it's one of those books that's for adults and for children, I think. And I think that when parents read it to their kids, they get as much out of it as the kids do. It's such enormous themes of what it is to be human, what it is to find friends in the world, how the people you're going to meet, what imagination means to children, what the childlike capacity for curiosity, and that lots of adults lose that as they get older. And I think there's so many dense themes within this book, but told in a really simplistic, beautiful way through the Little Prince and his relationship with the star and with the flower. And I just think that that's what great books are, and why those great books sustain, because they're dense material told in a really simplistic way.
Well, it feels initially, Ruth, deceptively simplistic, doesn't it? But actually, as you've just pointed out, the themes in it are huge, aren't they? And require us as adults really to think.
Yeah, and you're going from one character to the next. Each, in that way, it's quite simple. You're meeting someone new each time. You're meeting and the Little Prince, as he's meeting them, you are too. And you're dealing.
You're a little quiet, Ruth.
Oh, am I?
I need you to have that amazing voice.
Now? Is that better?
Imagine you're on stage at the Royal Shakespeare.
Right. No, I think that why it feels so simple in one way is that you're meeting these new characters every chapter through with the Little Prince. And that's quite, in that structure, it feels quite simplistic in that way. But actually what you are facing, what he is facing, the questions he's asking, and the answers he's given by adults that he thinks, that we all think should know better or are usually wise, and they prove not to be. And actually, he's asking really honest questions that they can't answer themselves. And his innocence and the way that he looks at the world is so much more wise, in a way, than all those humans, those adults that he comes across. So I think as an adult, you're reading it thinking, wow, yeah, these people you meet time and time again in life, and they're not as wise as they think they are.
You didn't, of course, grow up with this book, did you? Like I didn't grow up with this book.
No.
So then reading it for the first time, when did you begin to start reading it?
Just for this. So I got asked to do this, a week ago, and so I started reading at the weekend, and it's a beautiful novel. It's so, by the end of it, and you'll see when you keep listening to this as it goes on, it's really moving. It's incredibly moving by the end, and heartbreaking. And it's about friendship, and it's about love, and it's about the human condition, and about loss. And I think I was incredibly moved by the end. It's really emotional. It's a beautiful piece.
That's amazing that you found it emotional. How do you think it represents love?
Well, it's through the finding those connections. I mean, the parts that we've just read are really him finding these people that he can't connect to. He doesn't understand. They make no sense to him. And as the piece goes on, you realize that he's looking for a companion. He's looking somehow to unite or to find compatibility or something. And within that, he realizes what's important to him through seeing what isn't important to him in a way, or what these people don't value. He understands what he values. So he starts valuing his relationship with the flower. He starts even the talk with the fox later on. You get that conversation about being tamed and about sort of what it means to be in a relationship with someone. So I sort of think amongst, even though you meet all these fairly horrific people, underneath it is about the power of human connection and how important that is, and where love is at the heart of that.
And what about the use of the rose and flowers to represent, there she is, to represent love and relationship, or a woman?
It was so funny because when I started reading this, I thought, where are all the female characters? Because I was like, there's a lot of horrible females out there too, but also they're all represented as men that he comes across, apart from the flower. And initially, the feminist in me was sort of thinking, well, she's complicated and difficult to understand, and it's like all women through men's eyes are complicated and difficult to understand. Yeah. And she blows hot and cold, and he's like, what's going on? So I thought, but as it grows, you realize that that's what a relationship is. It's a capacity, you love someone in all their odds and ends, and you connect
despite all the things about them. That's what true love is being able to love them for everything they are. So, I mean, you can tell me more about what you think is, or Michael, about
Michael,
the female, or what the woman. I mean, she's also nature, isn't she? She's of the earth, and everyone else is very human based. So there's like this creature, or this living thing which is from the earth that he needs to protect, and that he has a great connection to. And that's
I think it's about, the thing that holds it together for me with the rose is that it's about tenderness. It's about the growing tenderness and devotion towards keeping this rose protected and alive. And yes, he's deeply confused by what the rose says, and I get that, actually. And I feel that that doesn't matter. And finally, what really is extraordinary is the connection that he makes with this rose. And it's very much of our time, this business of needing to be close to nature around us, or to people around us. And so we've learned this a little bit, to me anyway, in the pandemic, because I've been, 14 weeks in virtually in the little room I'm sitting in. And I'm not complaining, because everyone else has been doing the same. But what really is interesting is when you speak to people now in the middle of this, because you don't speak often, you speak truth, and they speak to you in a way, not just an address. So the postman, when the postie comes, and we have 2 or 3 of them, there's a moment where they want to stop and talk. We want to stop and talk. We've got time for each other. And what's beautiful about the story, particularly with the rose, is the time they spend together, and that in the end is where the love comes from. It's the understanding of the time and the tenderness, which we've been learning, I think, during this pandemic, which maybe we forget about because we're rushing on. And that, of course, comes into this book as well, when it comes to the signalman, the station master, or whatever it is, when the trains are rushing about. It's so much a book of our time. This, and what's extraordinary, when was it written? 70 years ago. Yeah. In another world, another time, and in almost another civilization. But it's more important now, I think, than it's ever been, because we've simply accelerated. And in the acceleration, it seems to me we leave less time for the rose. And whether that's for people, whether that is for the love of your life, even that you have less time for, because you are racing around doing stuff. I mean, I've been married 57 years. And I'm not patting myself on. Yes, I am patting myself on the back. What am I talking about? I will clap her as well. She's downstairs. Yeah. What I'm saying is that I've done a lot of time. I'm just going places. I'm doing something. I'm busy. She's the same, and we're both as bad as each other. But actually, we've been forced for 13, 14, 15 weeks, whatever it is now, to focus on each other more, to do little things together. And it's this doing of little things. With the rose, it's wonderful, that clash, the wind, and there's a sort of care going on there, which, I don't know, I just found it very moving to read it again. I've translated this obviously some time ago, but I just found it was something I really felt was a book for today. It's the book for what's going on now.
Well, it's like what you said about all the characters that he meets on the way. So self-obsessed in their own way, or thinking of themselves, and that's exactly why we've got to where we've got to, in a way, isn't it? So it's why what's happened has happened, and whether it's environmental or it's political or it's the pandemic, it sort of all stemmed from the fact that we weren't taking great care of each other and of the planet and of what was around us, and we were ignoring it and racing. I mean, when the lamplighter says, the world has got faster and faster, I mean, our world has got incredibly fast, and it's insane. And same with me. I've been working non-stop for years, and suddenly to be forced to stop and to really appreciate even my local surroundings. So I know now the local shopkeepers much better than I did before, or know who lives in my local area than I ever did before. And that's sort of that connection with people around, and that recognition, and again, appreciating the small things and what really matters, your family, your loved ones, your friends,
And it's what children can teach us too. That's before the pandemic, really. I mean, we've had this awareness of young people about the environment, which has really been so inspiring. It's not just one other wonderful girl in Sweden. These kids are all over the world, and they have woken up to the fact that this stuff has been in my lifetime.
Yeah.
What we've done to the planet. It's interesting, this word planet keeps coming up, doesn't it, in this story? And we tend also, with this planet, always to think of our planet. And what's interesting, of course, it's spreading out there. We're dumping our rubbish into space now. And I think that it's just so extraordinary how these children have latched on that this is the moment. We have got to get this right. You people haven't. And if you don't, we will. I love that determination. And that comes across in that he asks these questions and he will have answers. Just as Greta Thunberg wants answers. It's not good enough to give them a flannelled old politician's sort of, oh, do calm down, it'll get better. They're not going to put up with that anymore. And in a way, what's really wonderful about this book is it's an entire education, really, in one book. It's an entire learning about yourself and your emotions and the difficulties that you have to handle in life and in death. All that is there. But it's also massively about the connection to the world about us and how important that is for all of us. It's an extraordinary, extraordinary book. It is interesting because I have two favorite books in the world, probably. This is one of them. And the other one is another little French novella called The Man Who Planted Trees by Jean Genot. And again, it's not far away in terms of when it was written. These are books which sort of foretold our great difficulty. The Man Who Planted Trees is about an old shepherd who lives in an arid part of Provence and realizes that the only way you're going to change this world is to plant trees. And he's discovered going out there every single day with 100 acorns planting trees. And there's a young student who comes along and watches it and then comes back 10 years later, and 10 years later, and 10 years later. And this is forest growing, and the valley is full of birds and the water is flowing. I know it sounds romantic, but it's not. And it's what these young ones, I think, are determined to do. And this book, The Little Prince, it pricks our conscience, touches our hearts. It does all these things. Anyway, I just learned a lot more about it, and it's wonderful to read out loud, isn't it, Ruth? Don't you think it's?
No, I love it.
I'm not talking about my translation. I'm talking about the book.
So I've got a nice splodge of light is following me around. No, I loved it. I love the characters, and they're just. And also, it's funny because I found a lot of the characters very sad. You know, like on the page they're set in their ways and they're stuck, but there's a sadness to all of them. The king, you know, he's desperate to have someone stay. I just need someone by me. The lamplighter has got a sadness to him that he's just on an endless kind of work. You know, he's on the treadmill.
No, it's about need. It's absolutely about need. All of us having needs, really. I mean, we sort of half laugh at the king and half laugh at the lamplighter, but we can see a bit of the king and the bit of the lamplighter in all of us, really. It's there.
Can I just firstly say a massive shout out to Alice Mazzilli and her incredible calligraphy that you can see there on the screen. It's beautiful, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. The king, of course, that we were talking about. Alice, thank you very much. Superb. We've got some audience questions as well.
Thank you so much.
No, superb.
Oh, look, yes, look at it. No, lovely. It's the first time I've seen it. It's brilliant, Alice. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Thank you so much. It was fun.
Here's a question from the audience. For what reason do you think stories are important in such times? One would think reality and politics might be more important. Ruth, what do you think?
Never. I think I live in a world of fiction. I live in a world of imagination the whole time. And it's where I learn everything about myself and about the human condition and how to improve myself. It is escapism, but you learn every time you go there. And I think the act of imagination is the most special thing that we have. So fiction is, it allows us to hope of what there could be, what the future could be, of how the world could improve. It allows us to progress because we can use our imagination. And if we're taught and encouraged to use our imagination and live in spaces that are hopeful, then we can make that happen for ourselves. But I think that for me, I'm so lucky to be able to live in imagination in a way that some people aren't able to. And it keeps me childlike as well. It keeps me constantly curious and open and empathetic. I think it's really, for empathy and for understanding, it's vital. So at these times, I would say read more. Yes. Indulge more in those beautiful stories that teach you about the world and teach you why this is happening now and how you can change it.
It's a slightly futile task asking two creatives to pick politics over fiction. It has to be said. But Michael, what place does such stories play in times of friction, in times that are as unsettling as these?
Well, the first thing to say is I think that politics and fiction seem to be roughly the same thing.
Yeah. Merging, yeah.
I think so. Truths and half-truths, they weave themselves for difficult and pretty sad reasons just at the moment, I think. I don't know anything more. I mean, obviously, I write for an audience that is, generally speaking, younger, not necessarily so. I hope I've written some books, not as great as this, but books which do cross over between young and older. What I do know about all good literature and great theatre and great film and great music, all of it, is that from it we gain knowledge. I mean, knowledge is it begins with knowledge. Everything begins with knowledge. Knowledge of ourselves, of the world about us. And through that knowledge, the more we learn, the more we understand what's out there and understand about ourselves. Now, if you're a young person growing up in this unspeakably complicated world, and it's the last few months have just illustrated how much more complicated it is. They have adults around them in enormous difficulty and under great stress and great tension. It is even more important than ever that they have access to that pathway of knowledge, which does lead to understanding. And as Ruth has just said, empathy. Empathy is the key to the whole thing. I mean, the way we have gone wrong, it's all about a lack of empathy of other people, of the planet. And that comes through just not having had a close enough experience of it. We need stories that take us to places we've never been to meet people we've never met, to talk to people who come from other cultures, other religions, and do that young. So that the more we are fascinated and intrigued by that, the more it enriches our world, the more it gives us confidence, and the confidence to be able to write ourselves, to speak ourselves, to get up on the stage yourself. That's really, really important. That's why, just at the present moment, if I can be a little bit political, I think one of the professions that is suffering the greatest is the theatre. There's no question about that. At the present moment, it is so bleak, it isn't true, about how you are going to get 800 people back into a theatre and a play put on. It's very, very difficult. It is absolutely part of who we are. We've grown up with these stories in our head. And very often they've been in wonderful books. We've got these writers going back hundreds of years. And of course, we have theatre going back hundreds of years. It's kind of who we are. It's not separate from us, not a class thing. This stuff started sitting around a fire, people just telling their tales. And the plays happened in the streets. We may have formalized it into theatres and formalized things into books. And that's great because it's spread it and spread it and spread it. But it's who we are. And if we cut ourselves off from story making, storytelling, we lose this access to knowledge and understanding. That's why I think it is a critical time, really, for government and us, really, to support theatre. I mean, books are okay. They're, when people are shut down in a room, what do they want? They want a book. They're fed up with a telly. They have another telly. They want a book. And it might have Pullman on the front. It could have David Armand on the front. J.K. Rowling might even have Mr. Morpurgo in the front. They can read any book there and they can lose themselves in it. And books are sort of okay. But live theatre, this thing where people get up there and they do that risk thing, in front of everyone, and you join in that adventure of going with them. It's the most marvelous thing for children. I mean, the reason I can say this, I can't say it with the knowledge that Ruth has, because I've been on the audience side mostly. But I've been, for instance, in a theatre. I was in a theatre up in Stoke not long ago, where the play of Warhorse was going. And I was sitting there. I don't know what there were, 2,000 people. And they were mostly children. And you could have had a pin drop. And you know that those children, having experienced that play, those songs, that acting, the power of what was going on in front of them, are never going to forget it. They're going to go back to theatre. They're going to go back to books, to all kinds of storytelling. So it's the most critical time for our stories, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think there's something, I always think the power of theatre, of the contract that is made between actor and audience is like no other in a theatrical space. You are both agreeing to make believe together. You're both agreeing to unite your imaginations in telling a story. It's a contract made. And I think that is absolutely I mean, for me, in performance, the exhilaration of having not being able to hear a pin drop is amazing. You know that all together, thousands of you or hundreds of thousands of you are sharing a story and telling it and sharing in the power of that. And that's, extraordinary.
Can I just say lastly, because we've run out of time, I have to say, and this could go on for hours, and I would just
it could go on for hours.
I would be enthralled for hours by both of you. Just lastly, Ruth, I'd like to ask you, because you play roles, and perhaps not all roles, but some roles leave a part of who that character was or what they were trying to say within you. What would be your number one takeaway from reading this book?
I think it's about the power of connection and the power of his relationship with that flower and what he learns of himself, of what's most important to him, about love at the heart of it, about that the responsibility you have to those around you, and to be the best person you can be to those people around you. That's what I take away from it.
Brilliant. Ruth, thank you so much.
No, I've really enjoyed it. And thank you, Michael. What a brilliant adaptation you've done.
Thank you. And thank you for coming along. It's sweet of you. All the best.
Very much enjoyed it.
Thank you. And thank you for getting the sun to do.
I know, it's following me around.
So beautifully throughout. And you've got power over the sun. You should be a character in The Little Prince. For those people who want to carry on following what we're doing here, make sure there's Instagram, there's Facebook, there's YouTube. Institut Français London is where you need to go for Facebook, facebook.com/Institut Français London, and on YouTube, French Institute UK. Go and check that out. And remember, we're not finished here with part 3. We've still got more to bring you. So stay with us. Michael, thank you to you as well for your beautiful writing and hiring a tractor to come.
It wasn't that good, the tractor. No, it's been really lovely. Thank you so much for doing it with us. It's lifted the whole book. Thank you so much.
It was great. Many thanks.
I look forward to hearing the lamplighter accent again sometime in one of your performances.
It's all right. I'll come out.
I'll spot it. I'll go, I know where that accent came from. It came from The Little Prince.
One of my characters.
Yeah.
Go-tos.
Raphael.